Welcome to another episode of Boosted Rolls, a Warmachine and Hordes podcast focused on EU meta, tournaments and tactics. My name is Tomasz and I play Circle.
Hey, I'm Simon and I play Legion.
And I'm Pat, returning once again, and I'm most recently playing Grimkin.
Pat is with us for the third time because he recently won a Warmachine Weekender in York in UK. Simon was also there. He flew all the way from Czech on his Archangel's wings. And speaking of Archangel, this time I wanted to start the conversation with list preparation. We received some feedback from people and they wanted to hear more about how players prepare for their list for the event and for the meta they expect to see. And if we start this way, we won't forget to speak about our pairings before jumping into battle report section.
That is pretty classic for us, yeah.
Okay, so how about we start with you, Simon? How did you prepare for the event?
Sure. So for this event, my preparation was slightly lazy. Normally, I would do it in the way that I look at the list of top players attending the event. I would look at the factions that they are taking, and I would make sure that my list pairing can handle those factions specifically. So that is something that I do for almost every event, and it's very difficult to do with the bigger events. And of course, when you get to the WTC, you're simply predicting the meta in general because it's impossible to look at top players. But what you can do is look at top countries that have had success in the past and have a look at their lists, or what you think they're going to bring. Obviously, you can't look at the list selection in advance, but you can say, okay, so the Polish team are very strong, the Australian team are very strong, and so on, and have a look at what factions they're playing and go that way. That's something that I do. In this case, for the York Weekender, I've been focused on the Infernals release recently, and so I just trusted that my pairing, which has not changed much at all for the last several months, would again be the best option for me to bring. Not only because I have a lot of repetitions with those casters, which is Callus 1 and Callus 2, both in Primal Terrors, but because I think currently that's the best that Legion has to offer, and that it gives you a good chance into a lot of meta lists. So again, my pairing, Callus 1 with a Blightbringer, 2 max units of Chosen, 2 max units of Rotwings, Gudrun the Wanderer, and 1 Spell Martyr and double Hellmouth, along with Amok and a Harrier. My Callus 2 list is with an Archangel, Golab, a single unit of Maximum Chosen, a single unit of Maximum Warmongers with Gorag, a minimum unit of Rotwings, again double Hellmouths, and a Gobashef. So Callus 1 is there to be the all-taker list. When you don't know what the opponent's doing, you don't know what does what, you drop Callus 1 because he's a very generalist list. He presents a reasonable question for an opponent, which is, can you deal with this number of birds that are going to become incubi with Chosen behind them? And he is a very strong scenario warlock, and on Mirage and Spread the Net, you can be relatively confident of a win, unless the opponent is playing a similarly strong scenario list. Callus 2 is a lot more tailored. He is specifically designed to deal with Circle. So at the moment, I've found Circle to be the bane of my life, and they represent 80% of the top 8s in local tournaments, and at least 50% of the top 8s, even when I go internationally, generally speaking. And so that to have my best Circle answer available makes a lot of sense. So the use of continuous fire to burn down Ravagers without triggering Vengeance, so I can use things like Brand of Fire, D3 nearest models are on fire, and then next turn they burn a bit. That's a great way to start attritioning a Tharn list without giving them Vengeance. The ability of the Archangel to set things on fire that are normally very difficult to set on fire is very handy. He also provides an anchor for the list in the center. His melee threat range of 15 inches under Callus 2 is quite threatening for a lot of people. And if I'm able to collapse one flank, he's very, very fast and has a lot of mobility through reposition to start putting a lot of pressure on. So It's my anti-circle drop, basically. It also happens to handily be a very good Harbinger drop because of Golab and because of Consume on the Archangel. And so that list is basically what you could call an answer list. It's specifically there to answer Circle, to answer Menoth. It's reasonably good into Kador, and it gives me some sort of chance into Scorn.
All right. And anything changed in the meta since the last tournament you took this pairing?
Yes, Grimkin propped back up.
Hey!
And I blame Pat.
Don't blame me. Blame the Clockatrice. You got exciting new toys. And there were a good number of Grimkin players at the event, actually, right? And they were all running 2 Clockatrices, I think.
Every single one, to my knowledge.
Yeah. For me, that was basically the reason I picked Grimkin for this event. I've obviously been playing Crucible Guard with a good amount of success up until last weekend. And I was, until the start of the week, I was very much prepared to bring them again. I'd have been very happy playing with Crucible Guard. But then my Clockatrices arrived in the mail from Firestorm Games, and I assembled them, painted them up, and I thought, hey, I could try these things out. So that was actually my primary motivation for taking Grimkin to the event, was just trying out these sweet new models and seeing how much of a difference they made. With that in mind, I took Dreamer, and I took what's become kind of my standard default Dreamer list, with 3 Gorehounds, 3 Cage Ragers, 2 Skinnamones. Ditched a Cage Rager and 2 Gorehounds for 2 Clockatrices. So I get 6 heavies, 2 of each kind, plus 1 Gorehound, plus the Death Knell and Krabbits and Gremlin Swarms. And that list was great. I didn't really know what to pair it with, mainly because I hadn't really played it very much. I played it once before taking it to this event. So I didn't have a good idea about what its strong matchups were and what its weak matchups were, and I wanted to test them. So I didn't really have much of a plan to drop my off list, whatever it was. I ended up with an old witch list that I never played. That might be good, might not. Maybe I'll get to play it next time.
And you mentioned that, just to throw a little follow-up question in, you mentioned that you were sort of the reason for this event was that you just got them painted and so on. Is that that suggests that normally you would do something different?
Well, yeah, like I said, if it wasn't for the timing of the release just happening to be the week of this event, I would have just taken Crucible Guard.
And would you have aimed your pairing at the top players in that event, or would you just build what you consider to be the best list at that time, or what's, that's the sort of what I'm asking.
Oh, I'm with you. Yeah, I always don't try and aim at specific players. I do aim at factions, and I consider what I think is powerful and what I think is popular, and I try to make sure my list can cover those. I think that's fairly easy to do in a Crucible Guard 2-list pair because you have quite a lot of answers available to you, and it's definitely possible to cram all those answers into 2 different lists. With Grimkin, you don't have as many answers, but you do present more of a problem, more of a skew, and that helps a lot because it pushes some things out that can't really play into you. And then you're also lucky enough to have access to things like Remove from Play and Wraithbane almost on accident with the models you bring. So that means that you also kind of have tech for a lot of powerful stuff without having to really plan for it. A great example of this is High Reclaimer. When a bunch of your models remove from play, High Reclaimer is a lot less worrisome.
Yeah, makes sense.
All right. So we decided on Chaos 1, Chaos 2, and you, Pat, decided on Old Witch 3 and the Dreamer. So you go to the event and you arrive at the venue. So what are your impressions about the event organization and stuff like that? Pat?
Yeah, I have to say it was really good. I want to take a second just to promote the York Warmachine Weekender because it was the first one that the guys run, and they did a fantastic job. It was capped at 64 players, and it sold out incredibly quickly, as in like a few hours, a couple of days.
It was a few hours, I think.
Yeah, which is a really positive sign for the health of the UK Warmachine meta, and also a compliment, I think, to the event idea and to the organisers for setting it up. I think the primary driver was it was incredibly good value for money. And I want to emphasise that because I know events in the UK get a lot of criticism from people who come from abroad that they're very expensive. And this one is not expensive at all. It was £80, 80 British pounds for 2 nights accommodation plus breakfast and lunch both days, which is an absolute bargain. And it's one of the reasons I think people were flooding into it.
Including the tournament fee, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there was no tournament fee on top of that. It was just, that was it.
Yeah, that's all you needed for the weekend, plus dinner.
Yeah.
So that was really great. And it was a venue that had everyone kind of sleeping on site in dorms, which was very convenient and meant we had a nice kind of party atmosphere where people were staying up late into the night, drinking, chatting, playing games. So it was really cool.
Yeah, I can only echo almost everything of what Pat said. I mean, I had the pleasure of staying with one of the local players, Brett Wilkie, who kindly offered to put me up because I had to fly in a day before the accommodation venue. The accommodation at the venue was ready, so he very kindly put me up both before and after so that I could make my flights. And then we travelled there together with another player that sort of drove down, and we shared a car. Arrived at the venue, very comfortable, very obvious where everything was, very easy. If there was going to be a small complaint, it would be that we were over 2 different rooms. For many reasons, though, that was a positive. It meant airflow. I know this is one of the things that gets mentioned in a lot of conventions. Airflow was great, especially downstairs, but upstairs wasn't bad either. It also, splitting up into 2 rooms, does sort of split up the noise a little bit, which sometimes gets a bit worrisome. So a lot of things that I could consider as very potential, very slight negatives could also be positives. The organisation in terms of round by round, timing, judges, all top notch. And I, for one, am very looking forward to going back in November when I think they're going to have the next one. Is that right?
Yep.
And that so keep an eye out for announcements on that. They will be shared and shared well because a lot of community leaders are involved and love that event a lot. So I would be buying a ticket very quickly.
And what's the closest airport from the event?
Yeah, that's slightly more worrisome. So, Pat, do you know? Because I flew into Manchester, but that's because I was visiting family first on the way in.
Manchester is a good choice.
There's a direct train to the airport, so that's very handy.
Yeah, like Manchester is not incredibly close by any means.
No.
But
it's about a 1 hour 40 train from Manchester Airport to York Centre, direct. And it costs about £20.
All right. So if someone is interested in going to Warmachine Weekender in November, you can take a flight to Manchester and go there by train.
Yeah, that's one option. I mean, there are other options. Could be something like Leeds. There may be even some flights into. You could even go like London, Luton, or something. Would that be that'd be quite a way though?
Well, honestly, depending on what your travel plans are, if you're planning on doing any other kind of trip, like I got the train up from London and it was 2 hours. So you could go into a London airport, spend some time in London, and then go up.
Yeah, and I know a lot of foreign travellers that want to go to the UK do want to see London, do want to do the whole touristy bit in London. So doing that and then taking a 2 hour train, or Manchester is a cool city for people who like fairly urban modern cities. Manchester's pretty cool, so you can do both basically. So yeah, that's the travel part.
Awesome. So we can move to the battle report section.
Oh God.
So let's go around. Sorry, Simon?
No, I'm just laughing because this is the part where it always gets messy for me. Right, yeah, try and remember who all my opponents were, yeah.
Right. So let's go round by round, starting it with Simon. So we end up with the finals game last. And what I would suggest we do in interest of time to go through all the games briefly. And if you think that anyone was particularly interesting, feel free to talk about it in more details. Sounds good?
Yeah, sure.
Sounds great.
So round 1, I got a bit unlucky or a bit lucky, depending on which angle you're looking at. So I drew Ben Hampshire, playing Osram. So a very strong player playing a caster that Legion doesn't like to see. He was playing Osram and something else, obviously, but against Legion, you're always going to see Osram, so I don't really remember what it was. I think it was Magnus 2. Usually is.
Magnus 2 with lots of steelheads.
Oh, and maybe you had the pleasure later on in the event, or?
We were dojoing a cool list with Magnus 2, double halberdiers, double cavalry.
Yes.
Battle group. That list is very fast and very good on scenario. But like you said, against Legion, you're probably always going to see Osram.
Yeah, and I did indeed, and it was Hammer Strike. So double toilets. What else? Lots of weapon crews and is it Hammer Dwarves in that list?
Probably, because he can bring them back.
Yeah, pretty sure it's Hammer Dwarves and
Some battle group.
his battle group was a driller and 3 spray bunnies, I want to say. So I think that's right. But so that's the negative side. But the positive side is Ben is one of the loveliest gentlemen who plays the game, as far as I know. And so it was an absolute pleasure, even while losing. So we started off. The scenario was the Pit 2, and I believe he won the roll and chose to go first. Could be wrong about that. I was playing Callus 1. I don't think we both agreed that Callus 2 would have been a bit of a nightmare, that my Archangel would have just died, and that after that I had not much left. So Callus 1 and a fairly grindy approach seemed like the best way to go. His battle engines were doing consistently high amounts of work because of being able to hot swap the, what's it called, Fire for Effect?
Yes.
So Fire for Effect between the 2 battle engines, or I think one turn he put it on the mortar and was just constantly bombarding my Blightbringer in the early turns. So that was one of my biggest concerns looking at the matchup. You know, we sit down, I'm looking at deployment, and I'm thinking, right, where do I put the Blightbringer and how far can I move him up? And the answer was not really at all. So obviously I knew I couldn't just not move, so I did move up, but I knew that the Blightbringer was going to take some punishment, and indeed he did. And so in the first few rounds, he just put all the big guns into the Blightbringer and then little guns elsewhere where he could. Meanwhile, moving the Hammer Dwarves up, bringing them back with the battle engines, the ones that died, and just generally covering his tracks. I tried to give him enough early on to bait his feet, which sadly played into his hands. Apparently his plan was to feat fairly early anyway. So I sort of gave him that one. And in return, yes, I killed a lot of his battle group. So shortly after his feat, I killed a lot of his battle group, but the Hammer Dwarves were still sort of living on, and scenario was getting tricky. So in the early game, I was able to stay up on scenario a little bit. So it was Callus 1, and Callus 1's feat is still very good. But he was, during my feat turn, he was shooting a lot of the models. He worked out the lines, so he was shooting the models in a line to make incubi, and then going with a spray bunny and just paying one focus to boost all of it onto the incubi and trying to hit them. Luckily for me, he didn't kill all of the incubi, so I was left with a few incubi after the feat turn, and that allowed me to have a bit of game into him. But the real killer of the game with the battle engines is that they just have so much health, a lot of armor, and I was so focused on trying to take out his spray bunnies and all of the infantry that I wasn't able to really put much damage into the battle engines. And because my Blightbringer died early on to all of his guns and mortars, I didn't have the punch to sort of get through the battle engines and still feel like I wasn't going to just immediately die to everything else. So I never was able to get on the battle engines, and eventually we ended up going towards round 7, and he had essentially tabled me, and I had destroyed almost everything of his except for just like one Hammer Dwarf and both of the battle engines. So shortly afterwards, that was 10 Hammer Dwarfs and both of the battle engines, and I was dead. But I should say that during that game, I made a couple of absolutely monstrous errors. So charging a Chosen at a bunny, but putting it behind his objective to try and get the impact attack, and then realizing that the Chosen couldn't see the bunny anymore because of the objective. So failed charge there. moving Callus across to do some cool eruption shenanigans, and then realizing that the Harrier that was required to score the zone that I was clearing would then be out of control. Luckily, as I said, Ben is an absolute gentleman and allowed me to take those things back. We left the failed charge as it was because that was just fair, but the Harrier he let me take back. And frankly, I deserved to lose that game and thankfully did. So round 1, lost to Ben Hampshire, Callus won versus Osram.
All right. And Pat?
Yeah, so my first round was against my friend and England Lions teammate Paul Watson. Paul and I are almost always doomed to be matched up against each other in events. It seems to happen every single time. And this time, we played in the first round. He was playing Menoth and dropped High Reclaimer, facing off against Dreamer. His High Reclaimer list had the Judicator that everyone would expect from High Reclaimer. And obviously it was playing an Exemplar Interdiction, so it could have Severius 0 and Sweet Knight's Exemplar. But he wasn't running some of the more commonly seen builds that have Cinerators or Vengers. He was basically only running small-based infantry. Double Knight's Exemplar with UA and a unit of Errants. Plus support. So that was pretty interesting. And I think that build is definitely better into armored bricks just because the knights hit so hard. Right? With Battle Driven, they go up to power strength 13. With Severius, that's 14. They have their mini feat for roll an extra dice, drop the lowest, and then they have access to Hand of Fate on top of that. So, and they're blessed. And magic. So they hit really, really hard indeed. Which definitely helps him in the matchup. So I don't remember the specific details of this game in regards to who went first or who went second. It was the pit 2, so it was a really slow scenario. So that wasn't too important. What was important is he led with his Errants in the center. And Errants, unfortunately, are not especially good into Grimkim. They just bounce off heavies if they charge. Their crossbows, although they're magical and blessed, don't have any good targets except for Gremlin Swarms, who are usually able to stay out of range thanks to stealth. So they kind of trotted forward in the center. His Good Knight's Exemplar flanked with the Judy in the center as well behind the Errants. Now, the Judicator gets a bit bullied by Skin and Moans, and one thing I did is I made sure I had a Skin and Moans opposite the Judicator with Mirage, so it out-threats. And then Paul's left in an awkward spot where if he wants to come forwards with the Judicator, he's threatened very hard by that Skin and Moans. That bought me enough time to essentially threaten the zones with all my heavies, so then it wasn't just the Skin and Moans that was threatening the Judicator, but it was my whole battle group if he entered a zone.
Can a Judicator going full guns not kill a Skin and Moans? Like double spray, double gun?
The problem is I've got 2 Kravitz.
Okay.
So it's just the double spray.
Okay.
And that's not really enough, right?
Agreed.
Sprays are good, but they're only power strength 15, say only. But that's still not really going to cut it. He'd have to roll close to all 6s, I think, to kill the Skin and Moans with just the sprays.
Didn't realise you had 2 Grabbits. I thought you just had 1. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, the 2 are free in theme, because I have 6 free cards. I've got 4 Gremlins and 2 Grabbits. Gremlins are FA4. So that combined with the usual shenanigans of sacrifice means it's quite hard to shoot me down at range. Of course, his other problem, aside from the Judicator being a little bit bullied, is I've got so much RFP. So both the Cage Ragers, both the Skin and Moans are RFPing Errants wherever they can. And Dreamer, of course, has her Phantasms, which removed from play. So even the Clockatrices are getting in on the action, spraying Errants, and then having those models become mice. I've even started getting into the habit now of playing Clockatrices more in matchups where RFP matters, trying to cycle the mouse around. So you might do something like charge a model with the Clockatrice, kill it, turn it into a mouse, use one of its 1-inch range melee attacks to kill the mouse, use the next one to kill another model, turn it into a mouse, and so on and so forth.
Interesting. I suppose you could then run the mouse and say, I've taken a free strike, damn it, do you want to take it? And then... Yeah, exactly. And you can also, and if they don't want to take it, you can run the mouse to put mark target on a bunch of infantry, then assault all the infantry, hitting the mouse in the process, kill them all simultaneously, turn one of them into a mouse, and so on and so forth. Oh, God.
It's pretty cool. Yeah, so I found that to be really effective. And essentially, the big strokes of the game that really mattered is I could push up early without being too threatened. His Judicator eventually advanced into a zone and did some damage at range, but not enough due to the Krabbits. And heavies committed to kill the Judicator. I was in a pretty commanding lead at that point. I'd essentially killed the Judicator and most of the errants for basically no losses. But then the Knights Exemplar came in, and one unit of Knights Exemplar, that's 6 models plus UA, were able to kill 3 heavies thanks to their mini feat and Hand of Fate. I think technically they left one of them on like 3 boxes.
What were the odds of that?
Oh, they were he rolled pretty average.
Jesus!
Yeah, he was able to get battle driven because I had to clear one off with a Clockatrice in a situation where I couldn't make a mouse in order to get to his Judicator. So he was able to trigger battle driven and then feat to bring the models I'd had to kill back with High Reclaimer. So he had the full unit plus the battle driven buff, plus Eye of Menoth, plus Hand of Fate, plus many feat. And it's just, I mean, the amount of damage is just absurd, right? It's like 6 dice, drop the 2 lowest.
Yeah, and it sounds like the Clockatrice just doomed your battle group, but at the very worthwhile cost of Adjudicator.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was worth it for the Judicator, but definitely I would have preferred if I hadn't lost half my army to that single 6-man.
I would have preferred if I hadn't lost half my army. Yeah, I can imagine.
That made the game pretty scrappy from then on. But once the mini feats and High Reclaimer's feat were spent, I was able to grind it out on attrition. The other heavies were able to stay alive. And I essentially ground it out on attrition and won.
Okay.
Yep, sounds like you both had very interesting round 1.
Yeah,
it was cool.
All right, Simon, tell us about your round 2.
So round 2 for me was quite a bit quicker. I met Byron, lovely bloke, and I believe he plays for Wales this year, is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
I think that's right. And the scenario was standoff. And so he had champions in both lists. He had Colgrimmer in Storm of the North, and I want to say Madrak, one of the Madraks, in the other list that had some champions and some Fenblades, and so on. But in other words, that means that I need Dark Guidance, and so I'm playing Callus 1 again. Also, standoff's pretty good for Callus 1, and he's good into trolls in general, I find. So, we get going. This time, I think I won the roll and was able to go first. I think that's right. I put both helm. There was a really very nice forest, namely massive one, touching 3 zones, and so I put both Hellmouths behind it, base to base with each other, and one of them was in the circular zone, one of them was in my rectangular zone, just in case things get messy late game, and I was able to protect them very well. I mean, the terrain was just brutal against him, because even if... Oh, no, I think he won and chose sides or something like that, because we were discussing it, and he said, it doesn't matter which side he chooses. No, I went first, he chose side, yeah. And it didn't matter which side he chose, because I was able to put my Hellmouths on the other side of the forest regardless, basically. So, the game got going, I run up, he respects my threat ranges possibly a little too much. I think he could have used Colgrimmer's Clouds to give him by himself a little bit more space, but his army is slow. And then I get to do Callus things and just block him completely out of the scenario on one side, make it difficult on the other side, and give him a little bit to think about in the middle as well. So in the end, he manages to get somehow relevant on scenario, but his plan was to let me score 1. So he'll let me score my rectangular zone because he didn't think he'd get anything there to contest. But the problem was that he didn't see or recognise that the Hellmouth in the circular zone on the right would score it. and he thought that the no full unit was in that zone because my chosen was spread out, my birds were spread out, and so he'd calculated that I wasn't going to score that zone. He was happy to let me score 1, or not happy, but as happy as you can be. And the problem was that I scored 2, and Callus 1 scoring 2 on your turn is an instant death sentence. I just killed the objective and won. So it's not the first time that people have missed Hellmouths. They just sit there at the back, not really doing much, but they do score. So if you're up against Legion, have a care, because you can really lose quite quickly like that.
Okay, so an easy round 2. How about you, Pat?
Yeah, so my round 2 was against Cathal from Ireland, and he was playing Circle. So he chose Iona as his list, obviously playing Devourer's Host with all the Thun. His build was double Ravagers, which I think is pretty standard for Iona. He had 2 Stalkers for his battle group, and then he had all the things you kind of expect to see in all Devourer's Host lists. Lord of the Feast, Crockpot, Brigiden Call, Shaman, all that nonsense.
And was it the Wolf Rider version or the Ambusher?
He had Ambushers and double Champions.
And the second list was?
I don't remember off the top of my head what the second list was. I just kind of I'm going to play against Iona. And there it was. And so I didn't really, when it came to list selection, I didn't really pay much credence to what the second list was. Sorry, I know as a Circle player, you're curious to know what people are playing, but I do not recall. You'll have to track him down and ask him. But yeah, the scenario was standoff, so moderately fast scenario with a lot of points on the table to be scored. Did I win the roll? Did he win the roll? I'm not sure. I think I ended up going second. I think he won the roll and opted to go first. And advanced fairly aggressively, as you might expect. I did the same with my brick in the rectangular zone in standoff. I should mention that for Arcana, I picked Labyrinth and Sacrifice, which are the ones I most commonly choose, especially in matchups that I think my heavies are going to take a lot of damage, and I think I'm going to get charged by a lot of things all at once, which is certainly the case for Iona. And then Castle's play on the second turn is where the game started to get interesting. Basically, we're at that point where the lines haven't quite closed yet, right? All my stuff is more or less just out of his threat range. I'm making it difficult for him to do anything with Lord of the Feast with my shield guards. So he can send Lord of the Feast in, but it's not going to achieve a whole lot. Or ideally, it's going to achieve nothing if I've done it correctly, because I'll make it so that there's nowhere to land around the shield guards. And he basically has to decide what to do. So I don't know what you do in this situation, Tomasz, but if you imagine the Grimkin are at your right in front of you, you can't really attack them, but you can position more or less however you like. The only relevant piece of terrain on the table is an enormous forest in the center of the board. So he ignores it and he gets a defense buff, and my army can't really see or move. So that's pretty great. And it's all about his setup. So I think there's 2 ways that you can really go most of the time. You can either send a couple of Ravagers forwards to threaten and offer up vengeance if they get removed, which obviously they kind of have to get removed because they're contesting scenario zones. Or you can space out your whole army kind of wide and deep so that you're threatening with more models, and the further forward I go, the more I'm being threatened. Does that sound about right to you?
Yep.
Yeah. So the reason I've got Labyrinth is that if he does the first strategy, Labyrinth offsets the advantage from Vengeance, and if he just hangs way back with most of his stuff, I kill the ones that he's put to contest and trigger Vengeance, I get their corpses, and then Labyrinth means I still blunt his charge. In the end, he opted for the second option anyway, which was just to kind of go deep. His forward lines were towing in to my standoff scenario with Surefoot in the middle of a forest, in my scenario zone. And then he was taking over both circular zones and all the way back into his zone, with the Stalkers kind of on either side of his rectangular zone, threatening me if I came too far forwards. Because of that, I never used Labyrinth in the entire game because I didn't have a good option, but I was glad to have it just because it kind of forces hand to play in that way. And I was able to take advantage of it somewhat because he'd taken the option that gave more models in my charge range. So because I had no terrain on the board that would protect me from anything in his army, I couldn't really play a defensive positioning game. I just attacked with all of my models into all his models, and I extended as far forward as I could while staying within my aura. And with some lucky rolls, combined with my various ways of stripping his defenses. I've got Entropic Aura to remove Tough and Rapid Healing. I've got Wraithbane to remove Surefoot. I've got Manifest Destiny to hit models even though they've got Tree Walker. I was able to kill 8 of the Tharn Ravagers, maybe 9. Like a lot of Tharn Ravagers, almost half of them. Plus both the Wolf Rider champions. With some wacky Abyssal Gates and Dreamer shenanigans.
That amount of Tharn sounds like a mistake. Was it mistake?
Well, Katal was saying afterwards that he definitely underestimated how easily I could get through his defenses.
Okay.
And he wasn't expecting, for example, a single heavy to kill 3 sure-footed Ravagers in a forest.
Yeah.
Where actually, I killed them pretty easily. Kind of just 3 attacks on average dice, just kill them all. So he wasn't expecting kind of that level of output.
You can also paralyze them?
Exactly. So one of the ways that I can get more than normal is the existence of the Clockatrices. They threat 11 inches, and they're the ones that are furthest forwards. So if he wants to threaten any of my other heavies, then the Clockatrices can go quite deep, melee a couple, and their spray can go even deeper and boost on Ravagers behind. As well as support models, theoretically. And I'd had an angle to get one to Lord of the Feast, but it just didn't seem worth it because the chance of killing him with a single boosted 12 is so low.
I'd have done it for moral reasons.
Yeah, you might be right about that. So the Clockatrices helped a lot in going a lot deeper than I'd otherwise be able to. The Skinnamones and Ragers shaved off the front guys, and the Clockatrices went really deep. And so that was really effective. And taking out that many bodies before the force multiplier of Iona's feat meant I was able to survive the feat fairly well. One thing about Iona, of course, is she doesn't do much to make her heavies hit harder. So although I hadn't done anything about the Stalkers, they weren't too problematic and they didn't do a huge amount of damage. And one of them fell into the classic trap of trying to use its Lightning Strike Animus while within 3 inches of the Cage Rager. So it could not get away.
Sad times.
Yeah.
And without the Primal, he needs Force to hit a Cage Rager, so he might miss an attack. And
he did indeed miss his charge attack on snakes.
Every time.
Yeah, every time. So Cathal, I want to say, Cathal had pretty bad dice as well. Like, he was consistently very unlucky and took it like a champ, didn't complain. But when you're playing a cast like Iona, who's all about dice fixing and force multiplication, and then you execute your plan and your dice are still bad, it's pretty galling, right? And there's not very much you could do about it. You're like, well, I executed my plan correctly, it just didn't work.
Sad times.
So, so at the end of his alpha strike with his whole army on feet turn, he killed a single heavy, and I had 5 left.
Oh.
And then I was essentially able to eat up everything over a couple of turns.
Have you played into any Grimkin recently, Tomasz?
Yeah, I did.
And how, including Clockatrices or without?
Yeah, including them. I figured that those mecha chickens can bring back Grimkins to the meta and make the Diverse Host matchup better, so I needed some experience.
What's your take on it?
For me, it became very chessy, because how you fight an alpha-style caster is you never give them a good alpha, and Clockatrice is in the army, it's spraying my stuff, killing some Ravagers, triggering Vengeance, but it doesn't matter. Some of them there are paralyzed, some of them are in the animi, so they cannot get through army. So I usually try to kill Clockatrice, and if I'm able to do that without crippling any aspect before final strike, game becomes good. And if I'm not, they jump back, they can do the work next turn, and basically do it every turn between animi and between paralyze. You can never get a good alpha.
Remind me, what is the Clockatrice alpha animus, please?
It's Go on.
I'll ask the Grimkin player. Pat, what is the Clockatrice animus?
It is called, I'm going to say it's called Time Lock. It is 1 cost, and it is enemy models that activate within 6 inches get -2 speed.
Lovely, thanks. Sorry, carry on, Tomasz.
Yeah, so the matchup became very chessy and very positioning oriented. also very cagey. I try to never go in until I get a good alpha. And ideally, you want to remove Clocatrice and you want to get rid of Labyrinth and Gremlin Swarms before you focus on just pure attrition. So that game you described was very different from my experience.
Yeah, well, I think the difference there, right, is Cathal went in early and it didn't work out very well for him. So you might be on the right track when you say it's better to hold off.
Yeah, as long as you can.
Yeah, I mean, I'm aware that if you're making the game longer, you're playing into the Dreamer's plan, but I think that's the way to go. And as I said, it's very easy to make a mistake, but it's also easy for Grimkins. Like if she stays in the middle and leave the scenario open, you just outscore her. And if she leaves the stuff in your threat ranges, you might just kill the brick, tear it apart.
Right. So if they try to brick on the scenario, you tear it down, and if they don't, well, you can hang back as well.
Yeah, I think you have a lot of models to contest with. Grimkin player has only the Phantasm and early game
Only?
Gremlin Swarms. Yeah, because you need to kill model to create a Phantasm.
Only.
So you can spread really wide, and you can never get them to score a scenario zone and be in range to have a range to kill any of your models to put a Phantasm.
Disrespecting the mouse.
But that's possible it depends on scenario, it depends on the terrain a lot. So yeah.
I've just realised.
Definitely agree.
Sorry, go on.
No, it's right. What have you realised?
I've realised that I really want to see Lord of the Feast turn into a mouse.
Yeah, that'd be pretty good.
God, yes.
Yeah, one of the things that I took away from that game was I do think Iona is in a good spot against Grimkin. Like you said, I think the scenario in the terrain makes a big difference. But I definitely didn't feel comfortable in the matchup, and I think Dice really played a big part in helping me win.
Fair enough.
All right, so with that, let's move to round 3. Simon?
Yeah, round 3, just checking notes. I got it. So round 3 was Spread the Net. Yeah, Spread the Net against Andrew Devine, I want to say. Is that right?
Yep.
Yep. He was bringing Crix. He was bringing Venethrax, I want to say, with a sort of Warjack heavy list and Skada 1 in Slaughterfleet. Someone, can't remember who, had told me that he might be bringing Venethrax, that I should sort of be aware of it. But even so, yes, it can make the Blightbringer frenzy, and that can be very, very bad. But I felt like the rest of his list wasn't prepared for Callus 1. And that if you're playing against Skada 1, you do want Callus 1 as well. So in the end, I dropped Callus 1 again, and he dropped Skada 1. So I don't have a local Crix player, and I don't get good practice into Slaughterfleet. This is me laying the groundwork for the excuse of I lost. He had a very nice building in the centre. He chose to go second. I'm fairly certain he took the side that didn't allow me to use it very well for Hellmouths. I tried anyway, but it wasn't the best Hellmouth positioning available on the table, and it was amazing for his Stalkers. So he just popped 2 Stalkers behind there. They threatened the world, and with Skara 1, that's very, very scary. Man of the match was most certainly Icos, I want to say the name is. Please bear in mind, I do not play against this regularly. With some Warjack with a bunch of tentacles on the front of it. It was something like a Proteus.
Charybdis?
That's the one. Yeah. His character Jack, Charybdis.
Charybdis. All right, so, Charybdis. He murdered me. So, essentially what happened was I did the sort of rookie error into Skada 1, which gave him a bit too much on the feet turn. For him 2 feet on. I tried to line it up. I tried to make sure that things were just a little bit difficult, so they're just in his threat ranges, so they look like they'd be okay, but then they might be a bit difficult to get there because of the building or because of a rotwing or a tentacle, all these different things. And I was hoping that was going to cost him a great deal of time and so on. It didn't. He just feated and just killed everything in front of him. He didn't really worry about going for the optimal optimal targets. He just killed everything.
Just trying to maximize his total damage rather than make concessions to pick targets.
Yeah, and because I think this was an example of where I was trying to play against myself, so I very much pick targets, and sometimes it is a bit of a weakness of mine to waste time on working out how exactly to get around that building, to get to there, to do this, to do that. And I was hoping that that was going to be what he did, and he probably quite rightly didn't. And as I say, just charged everything in front of him, with the exception of Charybdis, is it?
Yep.
Charybdis, where he engineered some quite nice lines using his 4-inch reach, and ended up getting in a position where he could murder the Blightbringer next round. And in the first round, he killed, I think, 3 Chosen. It's very bad for me. Losing that amount of Chosen, which are the only things that can do serious damage the following turn, and when he's got so much armor the following turn, they're needed for me to counterpunch. It was pretty bad. My Blightbringer, which is normally one of my counterpunch pieces as well, was sort of limited. He was just on stalker stomping duty, so he had to deal with the stalkers that had jumped in. It was all quite bad. I was able to do some quite good Rotwing contests. I was up on scenario. I was able to sort of try to push for a scenario win, but his feat ended up just being so crippling that he was starting to roll over me. And so I went for a pretty desperate assassination, which unsurprisingly failed. I needed to clear a couple of models and then Dark Guidance and try to hit Skara with a tentacle because he was in Hellmouth range. So I spawned in a new tentacle, but she's on defense 16. There was an Ashen Veil model nearby, so it was 18. So I think I needed a boosted 12 to pull her, not even all the way. I couldn't get her all the way. I could get her half the way and then charge her with 2 Chosen. So pretty slim. Not a great game from me. I wasn't happy with my play. I allowed Skara to do what she wanted to do, and so she won.
All right. So, Pat?
My game 3 was against a gentleman called Andrew McVeigh from Northern Ireland. Andrew had only been playing Warmachine for a couple of months. And he was saying he was very surprised to make it into the 3rd round undefeated. He'd also not played against Grimkin before, which is classically a big problem when getting bamboozled by Arcana and that kind of thing.
My God, that's rough.
Yeah. He basically said, I played Krios 1 because he's the only caster I played, and they made me take 2 lists of this thing. And I said, well, I play Dreamer because that's what I want to play anyway.
Because
yeah, so he had a Krios 1 list with lots of guns, like Adjudicator, 3 of the Warjacks with rockets, Redeemers? No, I forget, Reckoners? They all have the same names.
One of those.
In Menoth. They're like Warjacks that shoot rockets everywhere.
Redeemers,
cool. On Sevi 0. And he had won his first 2 rounds with the classic Krios 1 pop and drop. A staple of the game since time immemorial, where people come forward, you knock them down with your feet, and then you shoot them to death.
Right.
So in our game, I came forward, and he knocked me down with his feet, and then he shot me a lot. But thanks to Grimkin's shenanigans, I lost a single clockatrice to the onslaught of battled Eye of Menoth boosted rockets. And everything else survived thanks to a plucky Crabbit taking a rocket and triggering sacrifice.
I presume then that Crabbit didn't have a great day.
No, you're right. The Crabbit did in fact die, and it's very unfair of me not to mention his brave.
And Crabbit wasn't knocked down.
No, so the way I positioned it is I measured Krios' threat range, including his walk and his
19, right?
feet. Yep. I put my whole army inside his threat range because I needed to be as far as possible, except for my caster and 2 Crabbits. My caster was incorporeal, so she wasn't going to get shot. And the Crabbits were in a fairly good spot, where they were screened reasonably well by the death knell, so they were hard to scalpel out before being able to stop things with sacrifice.
Heroically succor a rocket.
Yes.
Right.
So one of the big problems with this kind of Krios list is if its plan doesn't win you the game, you're on your table edge, like your whole army on your kill box, and you're so far behind on scenario. The scenario was spread the net. So after I survived the onslaught of flamethrowers and rocket batteries, I quickly got ahead on scenario. I was able to turn a bunch of Idrians into mice. The Clockatrices were incredibly good for assaulting down a line of advanced deploying infantry and eating them all up. And I was able to get a Skinnamones into the Judicator around turn 3, and that pretty much sealed the deal as the Gremlin Swarms capered around and won on scenario.
All right, cool. So round 4 is Recon 2. Simon?
Or Recon 2, yeah.
It's the second day, correct?
Second day. So I really wasn't happy with how I'd done on the first day. I was 1 for 2. Losing against Ben is absolutely fine. I have no issue with that. But I really didn't feel that I should have lost the Crix matchup, and that it was definitely, obviously my opponent played well, and all credit to him. But I knew for a fact that I hadn't played to a standard that I was happy with, and so I went into round 2 sort of a little bit raring to go, like trying to sort of repent for the previous day. And
now, one thing to mention about the previous day is you did get your revenge on Ben by subjecting him to a 4-hour CID game.
Yes, God bless. So in the evening, Ben very unwisely agreed to a game of Bead Machine because I had bought bloody loads of glass beads in order to be able to and a bunch of empty proxies to try and play the Infernals. And so he agreed to play it, and I think my second turn alone took almost an hour.
So without the clock?
Without the clock. It would have been a waste of everybody's time. We wouldn't have made it past round 2.
Was it recorded for Arcane Assist?
No, it was not recorded.
That was not a game you want to record, trust me. No one knew what any of the proxies were.
Including me, and I was playing them. So at one point during the game, I was just looking at them and like pointing to the light blue one and going, is that Mordecai or is that the other guy? And Ben was like, what the fuck? You don't even know. So it was kind of funny. But I'm currently in the process of using some of the community's really... they've done a lot of work on making things really good for the CID, so printing out like paper stands with artwork for all the pieces and all the cards and everything. So now that I'm not just traveling while the CID is released, hopefully that will be better. But yeah, I did subject Ben to 3+ hours of misery of Infernals. So going into the second day, first opponent was, I'm pretty sure I got this right, Sean, Scottish gentleman playing Callus 1 as well. In Legion versus Legion, it really is always pretty much a Callus 1 mirror. The only thing that you can play against Callus 1 is Callus 1, to my knowledge. And so we basically didn't even bother with the pairing stage of the game. We both just sort of brought out the Blightbringer and got to it.
So who went first?
And this was important. So he won the roll, but chose to go second. He made the same exact mistake I made in Norway, because I sort of said, all right, so interesting, why did you choose to go second? I just wanted to see whether his reasoning was the same, and it exactly was. He's like, well, whoever feats first loses, right? So he said, I want to make sure you go first, so you have to feat first. I was like, yeah, I'm just going to wait for that hammer to drop. And then we got into it, and he was like, wait a minute, I think I have to feat. I was like, yep, there it goes. Like, God, I really don't want to. I was like, yep, I feel your pain, I really do. The tournament director was delighted. He just thought it was hilarious that we both had to suffer the sort of Callus 1 mess that is just models everywhere. He was significantly less delighted when Sean decided to take a shot with his Blightbringer onto a chosen in the middle of the field. It missed and deviated during my feat turn. So he was called to check where this AoE 5 pie plate was going, surrounded by about 40 models under Callus 1's feet. And yeah, he was a little bit less gleeful about the whole Callus 1 mirror situation when he suddenly got involved. And I did point out as he was walking away that I might just take a pot shot just to see what happens with the Blightbringer on my turn, and he wasn't very happy. So basically what happened in the end is I have a bit of experience with this matchup. I played it against Emilia in in Norway, the French Legion player, and so I'd learned a lot, and he basically learned all the same lessons I did, but a little bit later. So, for example, using Eruption during his feat to kill birds, and then they replace, therefore enter, therefore die. All these little tricks, using running a tentacle out of command on turn 1 to be able to spawn it behind his lines, and all these little things that just come with practice. He didn't have them, and eventually he got ground out on clock. Which is where Callus 1 mirrors are always going. It's just who can score a control point, and then you've got the pressure on clock, and the opponent needs to deal with that, and they generally can't. So that was round 4.
All right. Sounds like an interesting game and a good lesson for your opponent. How was your round 4, Patrick?
Nice. So my first game of the second day, round 4, was against Konrad Króliki, playing Scorn.
It's Króliki.
It's what?
Króliki.
Króliki.
All right, sorry.
Konrad has been living in the UK for a long time. I'm sure he's used to people mispronouncing his name. So he was playing... Well, he played Zal 2. I also don't remember which list. He was kind of... I thought he could feasibly drop either of his lists. Can I remember what his other list was? Well, he was playing Scorn, so it was either Makeda 3 or Resheth.
Yeah, he's playing Makeda 3.
I think it's Makeda 3, yeah.
I think he's playing Makeda 3. And I wasn't really sure which one he was going to drop, but I feel like Makeda 3 is a lot better for Grimkin now that Clockatrices exist, because we can paralyze all of a battle group.
You need to hit them, right?
Well, we have Wraithbane's sprays that are boostable.
All right.
And then they become Def 5 for all the melee attacks. And they can't charge, and her threat range is already pretty low. So I feel like, I've not played this matchup, but I feel like Clockatrices definitely swing it in favour of Grimkin. And Conrad felt the same. I don't know if he's played it, but he dropped Zal 2. So Zal 2's playing all the Stony Boys with a single Supreme Guardian and a battle group of lights. I think 2 Shamans and... No, 1 Shaman, 1 Kriya, 1 Cyclops Raider, and an Agonizer. Plus 30-odd infantry, bunch of solos, all with big stone swords. He goes first, runs forwards, fans out. I advance and brick up. And then on his turn 2, he feats for +5 armor and runs towards me. I've got the Accursed Arcana as one of my Arcana, which is an interesting one because you never usually see it, but in the matchups where it matters, it's really, really good. And in the Exalted matchup, a Curse is a fantastic Arcana, because what it does is it stops healing and tough, which is important because all of the Immortals are tough, no knockdown. It removes Incorporeal, which is important because all the Immortals can get Incorporeal. And it turns Construct models into living models, which is important because every model's a construct. It's especially important with Zal 2, because his feat only works on constructs.
Jesus, that sounds rough.
And it removes incorporeal, or they cannot be incorporeal?
They can't be incorporeal, and it is an aura, so they cannot escape. Yeah, they will just not get to be incorporeal. They'll get it and immediately lose it. It also, because it makes all those models living, it has nice side effects, like it lets me collect corpses from them for a round, which is a big deal for the survivability of my beasts. It lets me use Annoyance to make them miss, which is a big deal because their mat is not the best. And it stops the solos from giving their models +2 damage because that also requires them to be a construct. So this Arcana does so many different things in this matchup that it's actually pretty cool. And it's one of the few times that you'll use it. It still has one massive downside, though, which is the way that it's triggered is really, really easy for Conrad or any other Scorn player, for that matter, to play around, because it's only triggered when a model with a corpse is damaged. So you can just avoid it by not damaging any of my heavies for a round. And the Clockatrices don't have corpses, so they're still fair game. But eventually you're going to have to damage something, and then it's going to pop. So I can't reliably use it to cancel the feat, but I can kind of turn his feat into a feat that says +5 armor, but your models can't make attacks.
Yeah.
Which is still worse. And then hold it over his head in future turns to still have all the other benefits, which are pretty useful.
Yeah, nice. Okay.
Yeah, and his army is probably too slow to jam you effectively and then feat.
Exactly.
just jam me out of the scenario.
Yeah. Now because he went first, he was able to jam me, but not out of scenario. And he basically flooded forwards. The scenario was Recon 2, so fairly live. He basically flooded forwards, had models on his own flag, and on my turn 2, because his whole army had bonus armor.
And a few ball.
And collected souls. I decided just to advance into him and not make attacks, which was a pretty controversial option. But it worked out pretty well because it saved me a huge amount of time in a really grindy matchup, and minimized his damage output because now his models aren't in good positions to charge. They jam each other up a lot more, and he's not getting vengeance attacks. So even though his feat kind of brought him the alpha, it wasn't too big a deal.
What did you lose?
That said, what did I lose on that alpha turn? I think I might have lost a Clockatrice.
Jesus.
And I think that was it. Basically, his big problem was he couldn't get his Supreme Guardian in without peace trading it. Well, basically, he had this problem where the only models, and what I found about Clockatrices is they're incredible for leading the brick, because the threat of them bouncing around means you don't really want to commit high-value models to peace trade with them because you can't reliably peace trade. But they threat so far that if those models still want to be safe, they have to back really far off. And with Grimkin damage buffs, a Clockatrice can still threaten to kill something like a Supreme Guardian, which is only armor 19 with 30-odd boxes. So it's not super survivable.
Which effects have some method of countering the stutter?
Placement. It's all placement. The stutter is a 3-inch place. So it's similar to if you want to deal with something like Enliven. You have to position models so there's no way you can place.
Okay.
One of the things that's really tricky about that, of course, is because it's a place rather than an advance, you have to have quite good positioning or quite a few models to do it. And the other thing that's tricky is potentially you can stutter twice, because it's every time you get an aspect crippled. So even if you position so that one stutter won't take you out of range, the second stutter still might.
Yeah, because you might be able to jump over a gap somehow or whatever.
Yeah, and I've had ridiculous situations, like playing against Clockatrice with Crucible Guard. I had a situation where a Clockatrice went way out in front of my army, smashed a Toro with its chain weapon, and then I shot it up, and it teleported 6 inches backwards into range of its defensive aura and shield guards. And then I couldn't finish it off. And that was pretty frustrating.
Right.
Right. And correct me if I'm wrong, with Revive, it can go 9 inches?
Potentially it could go 12 if you do exactly the right amounts of damage. Also, the same is true with the Sacrifice Arcana, where you can damage it, it can teleport around, you can kill something else, you can heal it to full, and then you can start the shenanigans all over again. So it's really, really hard to kill, and it's especially good on model-to-model peace trades. So essentially, the Supreme Guardian did not want to go in on a Clockatrice and probably not kill it, so it stayed back. Which meant that I didn't lose too much.
Can a Clockatrice kill a Supreme Guardian?
It can get quite close.
Right, it can ding it up.
Was there an Agonizer?
Yeah, not with the Agonizer, but what it can do as well is it can pretty reliably kill the Agonizer, and then another heavy can kill the Guardian.
Yeah, with the spray?
Yeah, because if the Supreme Guardian goes in on the Clockatrice, it's going to be in threat range of all the other heavies.
Yeah, then it's done, yeah.
Yeah, and the Clockatrice can... it can usually, with a large base and reach, it can usually find an angle to get the Agonizer if the Agonizer is far forward enough to project the aura. Depends on the terrain and stuff, but the way the models were placed, it certainly could. So basically, it's a weird matchup, but I found that Arcana, a curse, was really great. And I was trading fairly evenly with Immortals, but Conrad was getting a lot of advantage out of me not being able to remove as many models as I wanted, because I only RFP'd with the mouse and not with my Grimkin heavies because his models weren't living. So I couldn't get many corpses. He had loads of souls. And he was able to grind me down pretty effectively. I was in a situation where, because he'd held his Supreme Guardian back, it was bullying me later on, and I was running out of attacks to deal with so many recurring Immortals. And the Supreme Guardian. one thing I had going for my favour is I was able to get a Cage Rager to contest his recon flag. And this is basically where the game swung, because I'd ground down so many Immortals. The Cage Rager basically trampled over some Immortals, killing them, and bought attacks to kill Hakar and an Ancestral Guardian. And this really swung things back in my favour. The only way that Comrade could seal the game was killing the Cage Rager, and the only way he could do that was sending in his caster. So Zal 2 goes in, gets the damage buff from one of his little dudes with a hammer, and beats up the Cage Rager, but has to spend basically his entire stack of Fury to do it. That leaves him on his recon flag, but within 10 inches of a Skin and Moans. And although a lot of Immortals and the Kriya and the Shaman, and I think the Cyclops Raider, basically every model that's available then runs in front of the Skin and Moans, but I'm able to find an angle where Dreamer can snipe out a single model with Abyssal Gate, and that creates a path where the Skin and Moans can walk up and kill Zal. So I do that, and I'm very relieved, because I was far behind in scenario and attrition. And if I didn't have that angle, I probably would have lost.
Wow.
And you were able to get there without a free strike.
Yeah. It's worth mentioning that Skin and Moans really couldn't care less about free strikes, because they can spend corpses to heal themselves in their activation.
Yeah.
But yeah.
It's worth mentioning. Yes, it is.
One of their many tricks.
Yeah.
All right. So let's move to round 5. It's Mirage, and it's semi-finals for you, Pat.
And definitely not the semi-finals for me. So I will keep my round 5 brief. I know that we're sort of going a little over time, and also it was one of my shorter games. So I then met the twin brother of the Callus 1 player that I played against, so also from Scotland, playing Circle. He had a Tharn list and a Kruger 2 Bones list. In either case, whenever they've got Tharn, I basically have to drop my Callus 2 list. That's what it's there for. So I dropped Callus 2. He chooses Kruger 2 Bones. I think it was something more to do with familiarity than anything else, but also that he felt he had the better chance. Mirage is a scenario that's pretty live, and Kruger 2's pretty good at that. So he lost the roll, and I chose to go first because I can put a lot of pressure on. My list is very fast and threatens very far. He made a big mistake. He forgot that we both have +2 to deploy, and he left a Sentry Stone within charge range of the tentacles, and of course immediately punished with some spikes, and they killed it. So he loses a Sentry Stone on top of 1, and everything of mine runs up 14 and threatens about 15. So he looks at it and basically has to... in order to stay completely out of my feet threat ranges, he actually had to move backwards. And he chose to do that, which I couldn't really, that's never a good plan. Because you're going to have to come in at some point, so you may as well do it without giving me more ground. I basically shuffled around. I had Golab behind a forest ready to be overrun through it, and that meant that he spent a lot of time trying to figure out how he could get around his turn. He came in, got the best feat that he could with Kruger 2 given his very bad positioning, but his early positioning errors just led to me scoring 2, and then very easily scoring 3 by scoring the same 2 again, plus the middle flag. I think Archangel... No, he managed to prevent me from scoring 1. So I scored 1, and then I scored the 2, my 2, plus the center flag, and I was able to shoot his objective with the Archangel, no problem at all, with the feat. So that was my round 5. And I think we may have lost Tomasz from the call, so I suppose I'll just ask you, how was your round 5? Was it all right?
Yeah, it was good. Shall we try and get him back?
I'm going to work on that. You start talking.
All right, will do. So my round 5 was against another England Lions team member and fellow teammate, Brett Wilkie, who was playing Circle. He dropped Balder 2 against me. No, not Balder 2. Balder 1 in Devourer's Host. Brett's got a really cool, unconventional Balder list, which is a really nice combined arms force. It uses the Storm Raptor and Geteric, so it's got a very powerful battle group that's good in melee and good at range. And along the same lines, it uses a mix of Tharn. It has blood trackers, which are really good with the strength buff from Baldur 1, as well as Ravagers, who are also great with that buff. And once again, the usual things you expect: Lord of the Beast, Bot, Bridget Call, solos, all that good stuff. Our game was short and sweet. He went first and ran up. No, I think I went first. Yeah, maybe. Anyway,
you went first.
I went first. Thank you. And I advanced up on Mirage. He did the same. And then I advanced in a big old brick. I was able to get Enfeeble up on his Storm Raptor from one of my Arc nodes, the Cage Rager. And I kept everything out of threat of his melee ranges aside from the Storm Raptor, because it was too fast and too close for me to avoid. But I thought with Enfeeble, it's not going to do too much damage. And I positioned in a classic brick formation where every model in my army is within 3 inches of a Krabbit, so that Lord of the Feast can't get me, because the Krabbits are surrounded by Gremlin Swarms, so there's nowhere for Lord of the Feast to land with his bird. I feel that takes me ages to set up. It takes like a 10-minute turn with only a single dice roll to set it up so that I'm out of all his threat ranges, I'm relevant on scenario and well defended, and I feel quite pleased with myself. And then he goes to kill me. And you know you're in a bad situation where the first thing his backline caster does is cast the Storm Raptor's Animus to increase lightning damage within 10 inches. And I'm like, what?
Oh, God.
Are you going to kill all your own dudes? What's going on? I don't really understand. So Baldur does that. He gets teleported forward by the shifting stones. So he is within 10 inches of my entire army. And then in comes the Storm Raptor with an angle I didn't see, where I'm thinking all about the Storm Raptor charging and killing my heavies. But actually, that thing is fast and has a long range, and he's deployed it very far forwards. And what he's done is he's set up a great angle to snipe out my Krabbits. Because I had to work really hard to get everything within 3, and I did not work hard enough to block line of sight to the Krabbits.
Yeah.
And he is able to kind of have the Storm Raptor just fly across my lines, ignoring the models in front of it, and shoot at range into the Krabbit that is sitting next to Dreamer.
Sad times.
And the objective. And despite Enfeeble, he is, of course, helped by Baldur having put up the Animus to increase lightning. And despite 3 awful rolls on damage, due to sustained attack, he only needs to hit once. And then despite 3 awful rolls, he's able to kill the Krabbit with the Storm Raptor, which means now I have loads of models clustered round a space exactly the right size for a small base to fit into that is also next to an objective that is really easy to hit with a bird. So,
there are several viewers at this point thinking, didn't Pat win?
Yes. So Brett does a few other things. He gets a single blood tracker that with Prey is able to shoot at Dreamer, but unfortunately misses. I think it uses 7. And then in comes Lord of the Feast. This is Lord of the Feast that has Strength of Stone, so +2 strength, 3 corpses, and puppet strings from the crock pot. He shoots the objective, teleports in, and threshes to hit the Dreamer and 2 Gremlin Swarms. He kills both the swarms and does good damage to Dreamer, which she transfers with her single transfer. And then he is sitting with 3 corpses to buy attacks against a Dreamer on no camp, who only has the Death Knell's armor aura to protect her. He then proceeds to roll not very well, and I survive on 4 boxes.
Oh.
And because Baldur had to teleport within 10 inches of my army, Brett concedes. So, I got bailed out of that one.
I genuinely got trolled by this. So I walked up and Pat just went, yeah, that's the game state. And I just look over and see Lord of the Feast next to his caster. And he was like, yeah, Dreamer lived. And I was like, oh, yeah, ha, 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 wandered off. I was like, well, you know.
So it was Lord of the Feast, Puppet Master, Stone Skin, and Signs and Portents.
No, he didn't have Signs and Portents. He just had 3 corpses.
All right.
There was no Signs and Portents model in that list.
So I wandered off just thinking that Pat had lost. And was like, oh, congratulations, Brett, well done. Got the Lord of the Feast in, bravo. And then found out about an hour later that he actually had survived with the Dreamer. I was like, that never happens. That's just absolute bullshit. Champion. A natural born champion. Just face tank Lord of the Feast. That's the way to go.
Yeah, that's the strat. Yeah, I always say that if you want to do well at events, you have to play well and get lucky. And that was a round where I definitely got lucky. I also got a newfound appreciation for Storm Raptors in that list and their ability to enable those interesting plays, which is something I hadn't really thought about with them before. I kind of resigned them as just being there for infantry matchups, and I hadn't considered how many angles you get with such a fast long-range model.
The pulse is a real pain in my ass. Storm Raptors are a pain. But I love Brett's list. I think it's... I originally sort of raised my eyebrows at not having double Ravagers, and then I immediately put them back down again after we'd played some games.
What was the list?
He has a more combined arms sort of Baldur 1 list. So he has Baldur 1, Storm Raptor, Getorix, and then Ravagers, Blood Trekkers with Nuala, Corpse, Pot, Lord of the Feast, Bridget and Cowl, all the usual stuff, but not double Ravagers.
All right.
Yeah. And a unit of shifting stones.
There's
probably some other things I'm forgetting, but that's
the basis of it. Yeah, we don't want to.
Sounds like Robin's list, but replaces the Ravagers and Blood Shaman for Getorix.
Yeah, and against me and against some of the stuff I was doing, the Getorix really brings something to the list. I was quite impressed.
Yeah.
So
you have a lot of incredible targets for Baldur's Stone buff on that list. One of the only downside is you maybe have too many good targets and they can't all have it at once.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I'm not sure that's a huge downside.
Yeah, so Baldur plays a bit differently from, for example, Hayana. So he plays for a long game. You send your army in waves, so it's fine.
Yeah, that's true.
I still think he can cry me a river.
All right, so the lesson we all take from this is to win a tournament, skill is required, but luck is necessary.
For sure.
All right, so we move to round 6.
Round 6 on Invasion, yep. So I ran into a Menoth, a lovely bloke, I hadn't met him before, Jamie CL. I'm not sure, I think it's a double-barreled surname, and I'm not sure what it is, so I won't guess. And he was playing Harbinger with Adjudicator, and I believe High Reclaimer. But he ended up playing Harbinger into me. And of course, against Menoth, I played my Fire Immune caster and dropped Callus 2. So we ended up with, as I say, Callus 2 against Harbinger. It was probably my best game of the whole weekend, although I will try and keep it relatively short. I am so used to High Reclaim Adjudicator that I just every time it did something, I expected the model to die. You know, my hand's just reaching over to take it off the table whenever he says, yeah, I'm shooting that. I'm like, okay, that's dead then. And it just wasn't the case. So without Sevi Zero, without Hand of Fate, without, these things that I'm so used to happening all the time, her Adjudicator was just significantly less scary. Now, let's not pretend it didn't do a lot of work. It did. But it wasn't.
There was a choir.
There was a choir, yeah. Which said no non-magical shooting for a couple of turns because he was a little bit worried about the Archangel dinging it up. And then after I moved the Archangel over to one side, he sort of started just running battle every turn. So he was able to go first, runs Harby up behind the wall, runs the rest of his guys up, just puts 2 of the big paladins, the Dragoon-type paladin guys, into the circle zones, and wanders up the little paladins behind. Vilmon is in the middle somewhere with the book. And behind that, he's got his Silence guy that's designed to take souls and give them to the Adjudicator for focus. I run up, staying out of threat ranges, try to throw a few scatter shots with the Archangel, doesn't hit anything, sad times, and then just sit waiting to see what he does. He comes into me quite a bit. He puts 2 paladins in each zone, 1 Dragoon, 1 not, and moves his Hammer Dwarf. Not Hammer. Are they Hammer Dwarves?
I mean, they might have
Anyone
been.
know?
Do they have Hammer Dwarves?
Halberdiers, Hammer Dwarves. There was some sort of.
I mean, Harbinger plays Hammer Dwarves, but he can take any unit from mercenaries.
One thing that Harbinger was running a lot of this weekend was the shiny new unit that had just come out from the post-Christmas
The
cycle.
initiates.
The 3-man, the initiates, the 3-man halberd units. Was it them?
No, so he did have all of those. So he had 3 units of those for free. They were nuts, absolutely nuts. Unbelievable value. But I think it was Hammer Dwarves. We're going to go ahead and say it was Hammer Dwarves. So I looked at it, and he had either very skillfully eyeballed or got a little lucky, and or maybe he measured it. I don't remember. But they were just out of Golab's reach. So I couldn't charge Golab in, kill one, sprint to the others, and just generally unleash hell. And so I had to instead either do nothing and wait for that to be possible next turn, or run Golab. I chose to run Golab, so I ran him up within 5 inches of as many of the dwarves as I thought I could get while still having a chance to keep Golab alive. And then I mini-feated with the Warmongers, charged them in, gave them Battle Lust, and murdered all of the dwarves that were... that I had Grievous, that had the Entropic Aura over, and tried to murder a couple of other things. He also made a little mistake, is that one of his Stone and Mortar Knights was within Hellmouth range and got hit and consumed. So he was a bit sad about that. And the big Dragoony ones were immune to push and pull, so that was sad, because I was hoping to do that to them once I'd dismounted them. Judicator came up, shot some Chosen, didn't do too much, shot the Hellmouth with the rockets, didn't quite kill it, but managed to kill it the following turn doing the same thing. The Archangel moved up onto one side, and on the turn when I killed all the dwarves, I decided to basically charge the Archangel over to that side. So that side had been a bit collapsed, and he didn't have the Judicator on that side, and he had a bunch of stuff in the middle, so I figured he couldn't get the Judicator over, and so I didn't think he had enough. He just mainly had Initiates left on that side to kill the Archangel. So I got the Archangel over into that circle zone, and was in charge range of Harbinger. So he then, every turn, had to really respect the Archangel's charges. He was putting Initiates behind his wall, hiding behind the wall, putting the book in front of it, and generally trying to keep Harbinger alive. And the Archangel, meanwhile, was threatening him. Sad thing is, he did manage to kill Golab, so it was to the box. And on one of the attacks that hit Golab, he did kill another model, and I forgot to Carrion Feast it, which would have healed me for D3, and Golab would have lived. Had Golab lived, I just instantly win, because with Golab available to hit, apply the aura, kill stuff, sprint, apply the aura, overrun, apply the aura, Harbinger just collapses. But because none of those things happened, it was all down to the Archangel. So Archangel was man of the match with Consume on his bite. So he ate the book, he ate the knight, he tried to eat Vilmon. He ate several Initiates. He was a hungry boy. He was just buying attacks all over the place and just going nom 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 nom, and just boosting to hit on the bites. Basically my other initials were just wasted on other stuff, and it was like martyrdom, fine, nom 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 nom. And meanwhile, I just had Birds and Chosen trying to live on the other side so that I could just stop him from scoring. It was going to clock and getting a bit clocky. And eventually he made a pretty big error against Callus 2. I think he had the potential to win, but in the last minute he spent a bit longer than he should have done on optimization. Let's try that a third time. English teacher over here. And it cost him too much clock, and he ended up with a number of seconds left, I think less than 10. And against Callus 2, that's an instant loss. So I apologized in advance.
Fire.
I apologized in advance, and then I set everything on fire. And then just clocked back to him and said, you need to roll for those to go out, and I am sorry again. So that was it. He couldn't roll it, and I won on time.
You roll the damage, right? Because there's like a horror story going around that people, when they want to clock their opponent, they just run their army into Burning Garth, and your opponent needs to roll for damage on their clock. So
yeah,
that's ridiculous.
That is true.
Never heard of that before. That's pretty silly.
It's been confirmed. So the way that it works, a little bit of public service announcement. If I burn your stuff, let's say I'm the Callus 2 player, I burn all your stuff, I clock over to you. You have a responsibility to roll on each model which is burning to see whether that burning goes out. After that, you are able to clock back to me, and I need to roll all of that damage on my clock. You need to mark that damage in a timely fashion, and if you don't, then I'm allowed by the usual rules to clock back to you. It gets a bit messy when there's tough involved, when there's low clock, and I highly recommend in those situations, get a judge before it happens, get them to come and watch the game, and just make sure that everything goes cleanly so that everyone's happy with the result after you finish. Also be aware, as the Callus 2 player, if you're trying to do that to someone, do not activate your Archangel Animus. It stops the fire from expiring so they don't have to roll. And you still have to roll all of the damage. Sad. Callus.
All right, well said and good advice, but I have issues with your battle report. You went through like 6 rounds and you haven't mentioned anything about Kiki Monk.
Kiki Monk was sitting in the middle on defense, God knows how much, and was thoroughly ignored the entire game. I never tried to hit him.
Oh, he wasn't in any zone?
He was in his own, and he can stay there and he can have it. That was it. I was just
single Kikimon in the list?
Again?
It was only single Kikimon?
I was surprised as well, but yep, there was only one. I was glad because I had no chance. That was it. And with Purification, he could stop my usual defense against very high defense models, which is wait for them to come in and burn on Blazing Path, and then I just feet them away. Or wait for them to die from the Archangel Animus or something like that. But no, he could purify my Blazing Path each time. So my fire immunity was gone, and the Adjudicator was able to spray me, and he was able to move his Kiki Monk wherever he wanted, which happened to be the rectangular zone.
Nice.
But as I say, in the end, he clocked. So that was my round 6. It was a really good game. I think I learned a lot. I enjoyed the matchup. I really enjoyed the game. The opponent was an absolute star. And as I say, do not go that low on clock against Callus 2. That's it.
All right.
Nice.
So it's finals. Tell us about this, Pat.
Yes. So the finals was, as you mentioned before, it was Invasion. So a very, very dead scenario. And I was playing the Grimkin Mirror against my friend Dan Scotlinton, DSL, who plays on WC Team Scotland. Dan has only fairly recently picked up Grimkin. Prior to that, he was playing Menoth. And he and I actually met in a finals about 15 months earlier in Conquest 2017, where we played Dreamer versus Harbinger. And I know he's been quite taken with Grimkin since their release, and now he's playing them, which is really, really cool. He and I had an identical list pair. We had been dojoing it together on the morning of list submission, and we even came up with our pointless off list together as well in the hopes that we might use it. And I think he did use it once in the event to beat up Menoth, which was pretty cool. But we knew that it was going to be a Dreamer Mirror on a dead scenario with really dense terrain. There was an enormous forest in the middle of the Invasion rectangular zone, which seems to always be the case in Invasion, and lots of rough terrain everywhere. And Grimkin Mirrors are always quite interesting because there's so many tricks and shenanigans to trip you up, and you always feel a little bit silly when you fall into the other player's traps, but also you can't really avoid them all. But what I discovered is that Clockatrices turn that game from being tough and interesting to being miserable. And the reason for that is the Paralysis Aura, right, which stops living models from running and charging. So the Dreamer list has 4 models that really matter in the matchup, which is your 2 Cage Ragers and your 2 Skinnamones, because they kill the other side's Cage Ragers and Skinnamones and gone to win the game. But they're living, and they don't have great threat ranges. And when they can't charge, they're just so sad. And the Clockatrices can rule the roost, just flying to within 8 inches of all the heavies and Kokoring, and then they can't retaliate. They can snipe out the Gremlin Swarms and the Krabbits and turn them into little mice and pumpkins and whatnot. And they can even get right up in the faces of things like Cage Ragers, Kokor on them to paralyze, and then use their Animus, provided, of course, that they're respectful of Arcane Vortex. And then the Cage Ragers go down to speed 2. We had a situation around my turn 3 or 4 where I was able to Labyrinth, and he had 2 Cage Ragers that were speed 0 and couldn't run and charge.
Oh my lord.
It was like a Mark II Denny 2 feet where your whole army does nothing. His Skinnamone's got to move an inch. So basically, it's a really weird matchup where the Clockatrices can basically do whatever they want and are never going to die because they're going to teleport away and nothing can reach them anyway, except other Clockatrices, which aren't good enough to kill them. and none of the heavies can do anything on a dead scenario. So he went second, which I think is usually correct.
I feel a lot better about the Callus 1 mirror.
So
yeah, I mean, it does come down to a similar thing that you said, the Callus 1 mirror, which is I identified pretty quickly that I was going to need to score one more scenario point than him, and then clock out, and then have him clock before I did.
Yeah.
And I could foresee, we got to around turn 4 as an aside, and we had about 10 minutes left each, and I thought this could get to a point where it's models in zones as we just push the clock back and forwards 3 times each.
Okay, and so army
so
points, basically.
Yeah, I was literally making sure every model in my army was touching a scenario zone because I thought it might go to that tiebreaker.
Models in zones is a first tiebreaker?
No, it's like a third tiebreaker.
Or third, yeah.
Yeah, it's after CPs.
Jesus.
Yeah, so first tiebreaker is how many warlocks and warcasters are alive. Second is CPs. Third is army points killed. And then it's scenario presence.
Models in zones.
Yeah, models in zones, basically.
Yeah, something like that. I think models in zones is before army points. Either way, yeah. So I thought it might come down to that. But basically, how it played out is he puts me first.
So can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
I think the Arcana choice would be
yes. So that's actually super interesting. We spent a long time looking at our cards and psyching each other out on Arcana choices. And that's also an interesting one because whatever you pick, your opponent picks something different and you feel stupid. So we both picked Labyrinth.
No,
we didn't. We both picked Ruin, which is really good in the matchup because you can use it to stop the other Dreamer player casting Manifest Destiny, which kind of makes each Dreamer bully the other one a bit, which is kind of interesting. And you can use it to stop Animi, and you can use it to dispel the enemy Dreamers Enfeeble and Mirage, and her Rough Terrain Zone. So it's got a lot of really effective uses. You can combo things like you can put down your own Rough Terrain Zone, which can't itself trigger Ruin because it doesn't target anything, on top of Skinnermoans. Then if the Skinnermoans wants to use its Lurker Animus to get Pathfinder, you can use Ruin. And so it has a lot of useful things it does. And then we both picked a different kind of movement control as our second ability. So I picked Labyrinth, and he picked Desolation, which creates terrain.
Okay.
Yeah.
Both really good, because Cage Ragers in this matchup is so sad. They're really slow anyway, and they've got no way of getting Pathfinder, and Desolation just takes them out of the game. So both Animi are just fantastic ways of making sure that heavies are never going to get to do anything good in a matchup where they already struggle to do anything good.
So Desolation there was just to stop charges?
No, you just put it on top of a Cage Rager.
It can't move because of Pathfinder.
And then the Cage Rager is speed 4 and doesn't have Pathfinder and just doesn't really go anywhere.
All right.
That's it. It's not even that, it's not actually, you don't need to use it to block line of sight or anything, although if your opponent positions in such a way that you can, that's great.
I thought that it's to stop the spray from Clockatrice as well.
In theory, you can, but the way that it triggers is it has to be on top of an enemy model, so it's quite unlikely to stop a Clockatrice spray.
All right.
So I went up first, as far forward as I could, with Clockatrices leading the way. By choosing to go second, he'd also put me on a really awkward board side, where I only had about 4 inches of open terrain in the center of the table. So all of my slow heavies had to kind of conga through this gap in the middle of the board. The Clockatrices were able to race up, being aggressive. He advanced as much as he could as well, and then the shenanigans begun. I advanced into the center of the board behind this enormous forest in the middle of the table, blocking the central zone. I send one Clockatrice 8 inches away from his front Cage Rager and shriek at it so it can't charge and nothing else is in range to retaliate against the Clockatrice. Then my own Cage Rager goes to 8 inches from that Cage Rager and I arc an Enfeeble onto it. There's a very cagey game that you play in the Grimkin Mirror, which is about how you spend your corpse tokens on your Cage Ragers, because having Arcane Vortexes and Arc Nodes is really, really useful, but also stopping your opponent from putting shit on your heavies is really, really useful. And you can't do it all. And I think Dan realised this, where I cast Enfeeble on his Cage Rager, and he used his other Cage Rager to cancel it. And I said, okay, I'll do it again. And then he realised that if he cancels his second one, he doesn't have an Arc Node for the rest of the game.
Right.
So he is kind of forced to let me Enfeeble him. He could use Ruin early, but then I can still cast Enfeeble a third time. And then he's used Ruin as well. So it's very much a case of in the Grimkin matchup, wearing through each other's resources and who can conserve their resources the best for when it really matters. So he probably made a minor mistake by even vortexing it once. He should have just let it go through. But yeah, so Enfeeble goes out on a paralyzed Cage Rager who is leading the way, and my army is in the center of the board behind a forest in a pretty good position to control what he's doing. So I was able to leverage the first turn pretty effectively. Dan edges forwards, and then his clockatrices come forward and spray on all my heavies. So none of them are going to be able to charge. And he positions, but he can't really do anything meaningful. And that's basically the theme of every single turn for the rest of the game, is none of our models can do anything meaningful because none of them move. And the few things that can move can't kill each other because Grimkin is so hard to kill. I then, in my turn, waddle around a bit, shriek on stuff. I'm able to set up a situation that I'm pretty happy with, where because he's had to be pretty cagey in the center, he's only towing in to the 2 circular zones. And I see my option to get the 1 scenario point I'm going to need to win the game when it comes to turn 7. I have Dreamer, who's sitting in the middle of the table, move into the left-hand circular zone, and I use my Clockatrice, my Gorehound, and my Skin and Moans to clear that zone of, I think, the Crabbit that was inside it, and to force the Clockatrice that was towing into it to teleport out of the zone if it wants to stay alive with its time stutter. So I clear the zone. I score my point. I'm especially proud of a play I make on the right-hand zone, where he has 2 Cage Ragers and a Skin and Moans all clustered up in front of his Death Knell. And I position a Crabbit so that my Clockatrice can spray my Crabbit and hit all 3 of those models, while also being within 6 inches to time stutter. So he's got 45 points of heavies that are -2 speed and can't run and charge, and are basically out of the game in the middle of the table, and are in no way in a position to do anything meaningful in scenario in a game where I'm 1 point up.
Did you catch his facial expression at that moment? It must have been delicious.
It was pretty awful. I think because we had so many weird effects going on, and neither of us had played the mirror very much, I don't think he quite processed it at the time. But what happened shortly afterwards is I passed the turn. The first thing he did was move a Crabbit, and I triggered Labyrinth. And that's when he realised, oh, these Cage Ragers are speed 0, the Skin and Moans are speed 1.
Oh, God.
My army is in the middle of the table, in a forest, and my opponent is 1-0 up on scenario, in a position that might as well be 100 miles away.
Yeah.
You know, there's no way he can get any heavies to do anything meaningful. So, to his credit, he does a really good job of contesting, which of course is something that Grimkin are pretty good at. And he brings back his Clockatrice, and he manages to position things so that he's contesting all the zones. And his second Clockatrice goes in on my flag, kind of heedless to the danger. It takes a free strike from a Cage Rager. It's heedless to the danger, and it just kind of goes in and kills my objective. And that evens him up on scenario.
Oh, okay.
So that was a nice play by him, and essentially he's able to contest and equalize on scenario before passing the turn back. In my turn, I also then proceed to do basically nothing, as Clockatrices teleport around every time I attack them, and he puts a forest on top of one of my Cage Ragers, and there's an Artifice of Deviation in the middle of the table, next to the forest that's in the middle of the table. So all of my beasts are waddling around in rough terrain. The only thing I managed to do is have a Skin and Moans kill the Clockatrice that took out my objective. Because even with its teleporting, it's not able to... I position gremlins around it, so it's not able to escape. And it gets chopped down. And we just grind. And this goes on for several turns. It's not the tight... But it's fairly... It's not that it's sloppy play, but it's not the smartest moves, because we're in a really weird situation where our whole armies are crammed in like a 12-inch by 12-inch box, but none of them can get to each other. And we end up having to make every single move really... with like widgets and really precise measurements, because it always comes down to a couple of millimeters as to whether or not things are in threat range, because the threat ranges are also low, and all their movements are being halved. So we're having to measure like, oh, is this Cage Rager within its 4.5-inch charge threat, and that kind of thing, you know? So it's this really weird situation where our clocks are running out faster than we're killing models, and we're basically managing about one model each a turn. It's worth noting that our rate of killing models is so low that all we're really doing is turning each other's models into pumpkins and mice, which then proceed to be turned back into the other person's pumpkins and mice. And basically, no models are being removed from the table. They're just constantly being recycled. So it's a completely ridiculous matchup where our models can't reach each other, and the few that can reach each other can't kill each other. And in the unlikely situation they do kill each other, they don't get removed from the table. They just get converted into other models.
So what was the turning point? When did the sort of the end begin?
The end began around about turn 6, where Dan is about 5 to 10 minutes behind me on clock and quickly running out of time, and it's still 1-1. And I think, well, we both realise, or I realise, that we're running out of time so that we can't reasonably expect to ever clear a zone again. And he needs to try to make a play that will push him through, but he just doesn't have any plays available. His model's threat ranges are too low, my survivability is too high, and he tries to do what he can to clear zones and kill things. And he's making a reasonable attrition lead. By the end of the game, he's killed a Cage Rager and a Skin and Moans, whereas I've killed his 2 Clockatrices.
Okay.
So he's a little bit ahead in terms of attrition. And he would win on points in zones tiebreaker, but he's just not able to do it fast enough. And I think on his turn 6, he clocks, and I have about 8 minutes left.
Right. Well, congratulations again. And I mean, I said it on the day, but really, you know, that's a hell of a grind through, man. Well deserved.
Yeah.
Yeah,
congratulations.
congratulations.
Thanks. It was a really interesting and intricate game to play, but yeah, it was pretty exhausting. And it wasn't one of those games with big flashy plays. It probably wasn't very interesting to spectate, but it's very interesting to play.
As evidenced by Paul's ever-dropping face. There was just a series of photos of this game, and you could just see the observers. And one of them was Paul, that had finished his game early, rushed over to see the finals, and then his face was just getting more and more depressed as it went on.
Yeah, you can, on Facebook, we had 3 people that were doing a report of this game because they sequentially got bored and wandered off, and they passed the baton on to someone else.
Yeah,
to
like
do it.
you watch it.
But you can see the photos turn by turn, and you wouldn't know from looking at the photos whether it's turn 2 or turn 7. Basically, nothing happens.
So I have a question about the ending. Would it be all right for him to just run all his army into your face? Could you reasonably clear a zone with all your resources in 8 minutes?
Yeah, so I forgot to mention, but one thing that happened close to the end of the game, which was actually really important, but the reason I forgot is because I was playing for clock at this point, and I was thinking all about clock, which is how the game ended. But I did score a second scenario point.
Oh, right.
And that was because the control of movement was so high. And like I said, it was that swing point where around turn 3, I made it so none of his army could move. That meant that at some point around turn 4 or 5, he didn't have enough resources that he could effectively contest the zone again. And I was able to score that circular zone a second time once I killed the Clockatrice that was contesting it. And that kind of sealed the deal. But yeah, in theory, he might have been able to. And I think if that happens, I'll tell you what I do. I realise that he is 3 points up in heavies, and I kill gremlin swarms and crabbits. and that becomes my win condition, is trying to kill other stupid stuff.
I've had games like that, very, very rarely, but yeah, they get silly. When it's like, all right, so I can trade this, but hopefully, yeah, if it trades, and then how many points? And then if I kill 3, he kills. Oh God, maybe I can kill it with a unit and then keep one of them alive and run it away. Like, yeah, it's silly.
But in this case, the scenario pressure was on him. So, and also you had Clockatrix still alive, and he had more heavy working heavies, so you could control the game more with sprays and animi. So.
Yeah, exactly. So even though he, in theory, could kill more models, his models were never really moving. And once I'd shut down the Clockatrices, I had a little bit more freedom to put damage out.
All right. Interesting.
I do think that matchup comes down to Clockatrices. It's a bit weird, though, because if you take nothing but Clockatrices, then suddenly the Clockatrices don't paralyze things anymore. So I don't know.
All right. So if you would to give an advice to another player who's going to play the same mirror, what would you tell him?
I'm not really sure. I still think that with Grimkin, the first thing you should think about in the mirror is how many heavies do you have. I think the more heavies you have, the better. I think that is the number one tiebreaker. So it's one of the reasons. So one of the reasons I like this Dreamer list is it has 6 heavies, which is a lot. And I would usually pick that first. I don't think the Dreamer as a caster is especially important in the matchup. I think there's plenty of other casters who are also really good. Wanderer is really good in the mirror. Child is really good in the mirror. So I don't think Dreamer herself is important. I think you just pick the list that is able to attrition the best. But now with the advent of Clockatrices, I'm not really sure. There might be some smart things you can do. You probably have to really prioritize them. And if they come forward, you have to have a plan for when they come forward to just go all out to kill them. Even knowing that they will probably teleport away, you probably just have to prioritize them hard. And eventually kill them so that you can control the game and try to get some late game scenario pressure going.
Fair enough.
That's my thoughts.
Fair enough. Mm-hmm.
So I think that's it for the episode.
We've run out of stuff to say. No, that was. I think we've covered everything that we wanted to cover there. Basically, it's an amazing event. Again, a quick reminder: there will be another one. It's supposed to be in November. Ticket sales will go up before then, and I very highly recommend that you can travel nationally or internationally to make it. It will be well worth your time and money.
All right. So thanks, Pat, for joining us, and thanks everyone for listening to this long episode. And anything you want to say in the end?
No, thanks for having me, guys. It's a pleasure as always.
Traditional. We almost had the silent finish. Anyone want to say anything? Nothing. That's usually how we sign off. Silence. It's been a pleasure, guys, as always. Pat, congrats again. I'm sure we will speak to you again in the future. And look out for more episodes coming up soon. We've got various tournaments that are going on that we'll try to chat about. So thanks for the feedback that we get occasionally. It does filter through, as you saw at the start of this episode. We do take it on board. We try to answer it, and it's been a pleasure. So from me, see you later.
Bye.
Goodbye.